a discussion with the new leader of the NAACP in Blair County. All that and more coming up now on Joy in the City True Stories. Joy in the City is a program highlighting people and organizations having an impact in our city. All too often, we hear about the problems and dysfunction in our culture, but we are coming with a different approach as we take a look at the good things going on right here in our community. I'm Bethany Marshall, and you are about to see what God is doing in our city.
Thank you for joining us today. Today's a very special episode, and this is the first time ever we're going to have just one guest for the entire program. Before we get into talking to him, let me give you some background on our friend today. Andre Holsley is a graduate of Penn State University with a BA in political science and a minor in military studies. While at Penn State, he was a member of the Political Science Society, PSUA Black Student Union, and the Criminal Justice Organization. His awards include the 2016 Abercrombie & Fitch Diversity Champion of the Year Award from the National Society of High School Scholars, the Blair County NAACP Martin Luther King Jr. Scholarship, the Altoona Mirror 20 Under 20 Top Scholar Award Scholarship. He is the Political Outreach Director of Progress for People of Color and a position on the Outreach Action Volunteer Committee for the Alliance for Police Accountability. And finally, with his election as president and CEO of the chapter, Holsley made history as the youngest ever branch president and the youngest senior official in the Pennsylvania State Conference of the NAACP. So that was a mouthful. So now let's talk about what has motivated you to be so involved in this litany of efforts concerning race.
From a very young age, I had interactions with it. When I was about 5 years old, we moved from Maryland to Virginia. And despite it being, 2003 at the time, the Ku Klux Klan was actively recruiting in the neighborhood that we lived in. And upon finding that my father was an African American, promptly showed up at our front doorstep, and only 9 months in, we had to flee from the state of Virginia, and slowly made our way up to Pennsylvania, got to Bedford County, stayed with my grandparents for some time, and at the same time, the Ku Klux Klan was recruiting there at Bedford County Courthouse, and so my mom just kind of settled down, looked for a place where we could be safe, feel accepted, and made our way over to Altoona, which for her, as a young child growing up in Phillipsburg, that was the big city, at least, locally. So, I had interactions with it a lot. I saw exchange between both sides of my family, sideways glances, inappropriate comments from older members of the family to each other. I've just kind of been surrounded with it my whole life. And then having a father who lived through the civil rights movement, who experienced segregation at its worst in our nation's capital, there was no way you could really avoid it. But rather than necessarily having to flee for the rest of my life, I decided that it's better to take that step forward and confront the issues.
You mentioned Ku Klux Klan. I believe that a lot of people feel that the 60s and 70s, that was alive and well, but it's kind of dissipated since then, but that's not true. It's still very active, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And people don't realize that my branch started in 1923 because the highest concentration per capita of Ku Klux Klan members in the United States was in Blair County, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Equal Rights League that attracted Frederick Douglass here, that was a major player in the abolition of slaves and the Loyal War Governors Conference, those are the predecessors to the Blair County NAACP. And I can assure you they are alive and well, because just in the last year, I've been threatened by the Klan, 2 groups of skinheads, and 3 militias since taking this position.
Wow. So talk to us about the NAACP. For the few people that may not know, what actually is the NAACP?
Absolutely. So the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, in spite of its name, is not just an organization for colored people, right? The idea that we should all be equal is a man-to-man, woman-to-woman fight that doesn't matter what you look like. But in essence, as the largest and oldest civil rights organization in the country still standing, stemming from the Niagara movement in the very early 1900s, these scholars came together and said, well, how can we recover from this horrific civil war? How can we ensure that the war that we just fought for other people's freedom, that the end state of it is that they truly are free? And so for the last 100+ years, this organization has been fighting actively to maintain those standards of equality. And it goes beyond just regular black and white issues, right? We talk about economic sustainability, equitable access to healthcare, challenging and engaging education, youth and young adult engagement. There's many game changers, 6 to be exact, that the NAACP tackles in the modern era.
So the former president of the local chapter, Don Witherspoon, was quite well known in this area, a force to be reckoned with in many cases. That's some pretty big shoes to fill. What do you feel that how has your experience prepared you for what you're doing now?
So I'd like to think that large organizations in particular adapt and grow. So Don held the office since 1990. You're talking about a 30-year tenure under one person's leadership. And he had a very different system from how I hope to run the branch, but I hope to continue the foundation that he built, continue building that structure. They're absolutely big shoes to fill, but I'd rather put mine next to his than put on his, And so, bringing in young adults and, actively engaging with other nonprofit organizations, working and partnering with colleges and universities to really get out that original NAACP message of the importance of education. So yes, big shoes to fill, but I think our best way forward is actually to kind of split off on another route, use the tenets that he laid down for us, but be able to make those strides forward.
Awesome. When we come back, we're going to get into some of the common tough questions about race in our culture. So just stick around with us. We'll be right back.
If you know a person or organization impacting our city, we want to hear about it. You can contact us at 814-944-1948 or by email at stories@joyinthecity.org. This segment is brought to you by Harry's Construction, whose motto is, "If you can dream it, we can create it." They are the kitchen and bath design experts, so call Harry's Construction for all your remodeling needs.
Welcome back to this very special edition, and I got my friend Andre Holsley with me today, and we're going to get into some of the tough topics or tough questions that people have concerning race. So right off the bat, I want to hit the conversation in recent years especially. We see a lot and hear a lot about the statement, Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Talk to me about the necessity for that phrase.
So, to put all cards on the table, right? Black Lives Matter isn't just the organization. And I know people are tired of hearing that, but I had the wonderful privilege of meeting Trayvon Martin's mother at the National March on Washington, who essentially coined the phrase. It came out of that unfortunate killing. And, it grew into this huge social movement via social media, right? It's the power of media today. And I think the point that has been lost was that it wasn't that Black lives matter more than white lives. It was that Black lives haven't mattered enough. And it's a tough topic to talk about, especially in a country that has so many traumas with so many different racial groups. But what makes, Black Americans unique is never before in world history had people been systematically brought 3 months across an ocean, intentionally mixed and layered on top of each other like a cake by different language groups so that they couldn't communicate, and then over and over and over for generations intentionally separated from their family members, right? There's this massive loss of culture, a complete degradation of everything that gives you a sense of where you're from other than your skin color. And so you go through this, people forget people were in the United States long even before the 1600s. We were actively bringing slaves here. So you have hundreds of years of this before it gets kind of resolved in the Civil War, and then you just move right into another system of oppression. I don't believe America has gotten to the point where we can really say that we're post-racial. Great, we had a brown president, right? He's African and he's American, but he's not African American, right? His family did not experience the same generations of slavery that my family did, per se. So he has kind of a taste of what it's like to be black in America, but not a generational one. And the protests nationwide were spiraled so out of control by so many instigators that I think people were able to let it just get politicized. And it got further and further and further away from a human rights issue and more of a, are you a liberal or a conservative issue?
And when we saw this really come up in the last few years, we started hearing a lot about the other side come out and says, well, it should be all lives matter. Mm-hmm. What's your response to that defense, if you will?
Absolutely. I don't disagree. I have not found a single Black Lives Matter protester in all my travels around the country, all around the state, that disagrees that all lives should matter, right? The problem is that they haven't. That's what we're missing. We have a group of people, we're not talking a small group of people. We're talking well over 10 to 13 million individuals who will struggle to get housing loans traditionally more than their white counterparts, struggle to get into higher education, struggle to be acquitted of crimes that they're accused of, right? And yes, there's personal biases that affect all of that, but when you have repeated personal biases that are backed up by people in power, right, you have institutional problems. And we have just completely dropped the ball when it comes to addressing those issues, right? And putting a damper on the backtrack that we have.
So with some of the stuff you just shared, we know that we hear a lot of the term systematic racism. And what are some things that need to be done, not just from a political microphone standpoint, but what are some of the things that need to happen in our community, Blair County specifically, to fight against systematic racism?
Absolutely. And systematic racism is this bite word that causes a lot of controversy, right? Because the argument is, well, is it the system or is it the individuals, right? Well, when you have enough individuals in a system, it becomes the system, right? And especially over hundreds of years of time. And, the best way that I can see us moving forward here is touching hearts and minds, right? So I recently had a meeting where a parent was upset that I went and met with their child after they, portrayed a swastika on a private school parking lot before walking into school in front of two of their black classmates. And, I was accused of being a domestic terrorist by this parent because they saw my involvement with the protests, where most of the time I served as a negotiator, right? And when I was talking to those kids, I emphasized to them that it's really easy to make stupid choices that hurt others when you don't have a face to tie to it. And I looked them dead in the eyes and I said, I'm not from this town. My family is not from this town. We didn't come from a place of wealth. We didn't come from a place of prestige, right? I meet all the criteria that people in the news comments on Facebook would say, well, he's an outsider. He doesn't belong here. I have no felonies. I have no misdemeanors. I serve my country. In fact, I'm even a registered Republican, to be completely honest. I am not in the molds that people would set, right? But it's so easy to say, well, black people this, brown people that, outsiders. I don't want my world to change. And so I don't need those people, right? But when you put a face to it, right? I'm not doing anything that would backtrack this community. I'm sure as heck not painting swastikas on Catholic schools, but nonetheless, somebody has to go in and take that step and talk to the people that are and make them realize that, I'm not that different from you.
I believe too often people make a statement, I'm not racist, I don't have any racism in me, because they're not actively engaged in the Ku Klux Klan or something.
Absolutely.
But what is something that you have seen that is offensive that most people would dismiss and think, I'm not doing anything wrong, but is truly offensive, something that you maybe have seen personally?
So one of the big things is, well, and let's clarify too, that racism, as a word has even evolved, right? That is when we are definitely talking about institutions. And there are people that we call racists, right? But lots of people have biases. Lots of people have prejudices, regardless of what they look like. And unfortunately, some of those things become trends. And that's where this racism word comes from. But one of the biggest messages that upholds these certain standards is actually ideas like we need to take back our town or we need to take back our country, right? It has been used for years and years and years to create this idea of isolationism, that I am just fine how I am and I don't need anybody else, right? Well, in a civilized society, everything we are is in relation to other people, right? And if I go down to Washington, D.C. right now at the Smithsonian Institute of American History, and I walk right past the Star-Spangled Banner, right up the stairs, one of the first things I will see when I go into the American History Chamber is a Ku Klux Klan hood, right? And immediately next to it is a bumper sticker that says that exact slogan. We need to take back our country. People don't realize that term was literally coined by the Klan. We use it in day-to-day conversation to support these ideas that, outsiders once again are ruining the towns around us. Just repeating that phrase is upholding this deeply, deeply hateful message that we have turned into this nationalist cry. And, messages like that are not why I joined the United States military. I didn't join the United States military to say that, oh yeah, I'm going to protect this group of people and not that group of people, right? Sure. To say that, I completely believe in the freedom to do what you want to do, except when it harms others. You know what I mean? We don't go overseas and fight wars or provide all this civilian relief within the United States and go to Puerto Rico and do all these other things, when we're in uniform, so that we can come home and see that the soldiers on our left and right who look different than us can't visit the towns that we live in because they're discouraged by the people around it. It doesn't glue, right? It's not cohesive. It does not make sense.
Wow. I'll tell you what, we're going to get into a few things that you want to do in the future. Just incredible conversation. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Impact Productions, a multi-layer technology company providing on-site, online, and in-studio video services. Contact Impact Productions to capture your story.
Made by Vogel is a father and son business that produces high-quality handmade wooden products such as cutting boards, bowls, bottle stoppers, and more. Products for sale can be found on their Etsy site or in downtown Altoona at the Clay Cup. You can't go wrong buying from Made by Vogel.
Welcome back to our final segment of this episode. I was just telling Andre, there's so much valuable information here. We could have several shows, but I do want to, as we wrap up, I do want to talk about your plans, your agenda, your heart for what you want to see happen with the local chapter here.
Absolutely. So my big thing is capitalizing on de Tocqueville's power of association, right? So de Tocqueville was this famous French sociologist, the first person not from America to ever write a critical review of America. And he talked about how in the United States, even just after the War of 1812, there is an association for everything, right? If there is a broken sidewalk or a street lamp that won't light, There's an organization that's there to fix it. But all too often, the power of those associations is lost because they don't work with each other, right? The NAACP has a base. We have over 2 million activists nationwide. What I want to do is empower other nonprofit organizations in this community, churches, schools, family service organizations, community action programs, to be able to do their mission better, to support them with our network of activists collectively so that we can work together to make everything for all of us better. Big tenets of that are going to be scholarships that are available to everyone, right? Working to restore parks here, create recreational places for young adults, mentoring programs, not just for youth, but for adults, especially those coming out of incarceration, right? Some for very petty crimes, right, that are looking for an opportunity to turn their lives around. Somebody has to take that step where we break the cycle of reincarceration, and show people who have been robbed of years of their life, either justly or wrongly, depending on their situation, robbed of years of their life that they could have been getting practical experience and they didn't, right? Teaching them to use that sidewalk smart, right, in coordination with book smarts so that they can create something for themselves. Some of those people behind bars especially are some of the most creative minds in our entire society, right? We don't know necessarily all the details of why they get what they get, but if they didn't do anything to physically harm another person, or if they did and they served their time, they paid their price, we need to allow opportunities for those people to contribute back. Because the reality of Central Pennsylvania is most people either work for the prison system or have been in the prison system here, right? So, and a lot of it's over petty drug possession, right? Victimless crimes. So how can we take those steps forward collectively, across all those fields and work to make a better community? So that's my vision.
So with what you want to accomplish, what do you feel is your biggest hindrance?
Politics, national politics in particular. Most of what happens in Washington, D.C. has no legitimate effect on my day-to-day life, right? Sure. Supreme Court nominations, congressional arguments over gun control, all kinds of different issues that literally tear marriages and families apart, whole communities that have no burden on my ability to make this a better place. But what does have a burden is when people who watch way too much public access news, let that drive their day-to-day. There's nothing wrong with looking at the big picture. How does making my community better make America better, right? But if it hinders us from being able to make intelligent decisions, right, from being able to fix that park or to pass that law that might protect our neighbors and loved ones, right, then we are absolutely backtracking. And it seems every conversation I have on behalf of this organization turns into some kind of, oh, well, you're probably just a liberal, or you're too conservative this, or you're too this, or too that. What does it matter? If we have solutions, let's act on them,
That's incredible. Now, I want to tell you that as part of the faith community, I believe firmly that there's no racism in the kingdom of God.
Absolutely.
For any church that has any element or support of any racial discussions is not part of the kingdom in my mind. Yes. With that being said, what is something that the faith community in this area can do to come alongside and partner with what you're wanting to accomplish?
Absolutely. And first and foremost, I am also a member of the faith community. I'm named after the gospel artist Andre Crouch. And my mom sang with Billy Graham and his choir, who ironically was that first evangelist to say there is no color in the eyes of God, tearing down the barrier down there at the Panther Stadium in North Carolina. But I see a lot of unique opportunities for the religious community, right? We just had the day of prayer in Altoona a couple months ago and saw a pastor from the Philadelphia, New Jersey area who crossed the denominational lines. He actually crossed the religious lines, working with the Islamic community and the Jewish community and the Buddhist community to create a group of volunteers that could share the positives of their faith together to make a better community. They've even been permitted to enter public schools, courthouses, prisons, places where typically the religious community was barred, because of that separation of church and state. But here in particular, I see good works being done. We have soup kitchens, we have homeless shelters, we have resources here, but the church community is going to have to take that step forward where we don't just think about our congregation, right? If we're truly trying to be like Jesus, loving everyone. I never read a single verse in the Bible that said Jesus hated him or Jesus hated her. He gave chances to those that society dispelled, so as we continue building ordinances across this state and across this country, spurred on by really far right or really far left religious or non-religious extremes, the church has an obligation as well to ground itself back in those values of love and acceptance and inclusion, right? Because inclusion isn't just having black and brown people in your congregation. It's making people feel welcome. And the church has a special place that it can make that happen in any community. There are no shortage of churches in Pennsylvania. Sure. None at all. My mom growing up in the Phillipsburg, Osceola area, 6 bars and 3 churches. That was kind of the motto of those small towns. There's no shortage of either, but the church has a special pool that those other places just don't have, So how are we using it in the positive? I would love to partner with religious organizations here to further these these messages, these deeper meanings to everything that we do on the day-to-day.
Well, let me just tell you, as part of the local faith community, Joy in the City, this show reaches people from a variety of denominations and faith backgrounds. And I want to commit to you that we will do what we can beyond just putting on a show. This is nice, and maybe reach some people with some information that they are biased in currently, but after watching this, sees things from a different perspective. But even beyond that, I want to commit to you that we will work together to make our community a better place. Whatever that looks like, however that comes about, my prayer is that we will see us hand in hand with what you're doing and accomplishing, because our vision, our DNA is very similar with Absolutely. What we want to see for our community. So thank you for coming by today, spending a few minutes with us, and I pray that people will see this and maybe transform their perspective a little bit differently after listening to you. Fantastic job today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
That's all the time we have today. Thanks for watching Joy in the City True Stories. Let me encourage you to watch other episodes of people and organizations having an impact on our community on ABC 23 at 5:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. every Sunday. You can also catch us each week on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Until then, be encouraged because God is moving in our city.